Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Understanding Purview, an Overview for Organizations. And with that, Jazz, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks for making time, everybody, for joining our session today. We'll get a good overview tour, whirlwind tour of Purview. My name is Jess, and I've been at Brad Union for a number of years and working in the SharePoint and Microsoft 365 space for much longer. I really love working with our clients to help design solutions that users can use, but as well, they're secure and compliant. And so more and more, we're incorporating Purview and, of course, other compliance tools in our work. So I'm excited to get into that deeper today. Just in case this is your first session with us, welcome. And also just a quick overview of who we are. We are a consulting firm, services focused on the Microsoft 365 and Microsoft platform and suite of tools. As well, we do have a number of partners as well to help fill in some of the capabilities in the Microsoft platform, like Preservica, for example, for archive digital preservation and migration tools and things like that. So we work with sort of the best of breed tools to build, again, usable solutions on the Microsoft platform. And we are based in Canada, although we work across North America. I'm actually way over on the east side of the country. I'm in outside Moncton as well. We are headquartered and based in Vancouver, so coast to coast. Okay, and this wouldn't be a webinar in the tech world without talking about AI. So I just wanted to put up my funny AI image of the day. I often sometimes think about AI as kind of like this vortex. It's taking in lots of information from SharePoint, from emails, from OneDrive, from all the things, all the places. And that is why, Purview and other security tools are becoming more and more relevant because we have to get a better handle on the sort of fast growing volume of data and information. So I wanted to put up my AI slide of the day because we can't avoid it. It's sort of the foundation and backdrop of all our conversations. And it will be sort of infused throughout this conversation we have about Purview as well. And of course, if you've been working in this space for a while, you know that AI tooling especially has changed some of how fast the data grows, who can access data in your organization, and where data gets reused. It's always been a problem with information overload. I think even 20 years ago, we were talking about information overload and it's hard to use search. And it's similar trends with AI as well. AI is actually accelerating the data growth that we see and increasing that sort of security and compliance threat landscape. And this is not just sort of me saying that and us feeling like that. We know it's true when we look at organizations, but when there's been surveys, Microsoft does these data security surveys once a year or so, and it is coming up more and more that the AI adoption is outpacing sort of how fast organizations can put out security controls. And even if you haven't officially rolled out maybe some AI, people are likely using it in your organization, right? So it is sort of that always present tooling that's there. And it does come up as well that Gen AI is a leading source of data risk. 32% of people said that. And then, of course, it's leading to more spend and investment and time that's going to be needed to manage all of this. And so many organizations are looking at increasing their budgets and investing in this space too. So definitely, I think this is a relevant topic, I hope, if you've joined us today. And we're talking about sort of how the data is changing as well as the tooling in Purview that'll help us with that. And I do want to mention, of course, if you're invested in the Microsoft platform, there's a bunch of products and features and applications that fit under sort of the security umbrella, and Purview is just one of them. And so there's some other ones listed here. Intro to help you with your permissions and managing groups and users and all sorts of things. Defender as well, and that's another area that plays sort of closely with Purview. You can help get a deeper dive in some of the alerts and potential cyber attacks, things like that. But we're going to focus on Purview today because that's about talking about sensitive information and keeping that under control, and then looking at some of the capabilities to prevent data leaks and to help us with compliance. So that's what we'll be. But I just wanted to mention this does fit into a family, and often, you will need some of these other elements to sort of build out that complete solution for your organization. Okay, so before I go into some of the more finer details in Purview, we'll put out a poll. Maybe, Noelle, you can help me launch that. Where is your organization on its Purview journey? Are you just getting started? Are you piloting features? Are you using some features in production, or is it fully deployed? I'd love to get a sense of what you're seeing, where you're at. just getting started, I see, is probably the top response. And number two, using a few features in production. Great. Okay, so I will cover sort of a broad suite of things. Hopefully that's useful for people. And because we have sort of just under an hour and there's some time for Q&A, I may go through some of these relatively quick. But if you do have more questions, I'm happy to follow up after the call, or even if you have ideas for future webinars, we can go into some of the other areas too. So. Okay, so the way I think about this, and sort of, I'll always go back to my basic questions, the 5 Ws and what, how. Why are we doing this? What is this data? Who can do what with the data? And can we prove we handle it correctly? So these are the 3 questions that I think about when I'm thinking about Purview and some of the capabilities we might need on a certain project. And so it often starts with number 1 and thinking about classification. We have to understand what we're looking at, and Purview can help us with that. So I'll go through some classification features. And then another area that Purview is strong in, or one of its strengths, is understanding who can do what with data. And this is a bit different than permissions. This is about creating some protections and controls, and sometimes based on scenarios that users are doing things in. And so it goes a little bit farther than access control or permissions. And then the third sort of space I think about in my head is, can we prove we handle it correctly or we did the right thing? And this often relates to the compliance side of Purview, as well as some of the audit, and we'll get into some quickly e-discovery as well. So those are the 3 areas I'll go through today, 3 sort of sections. And I'll start off with our classification, because this is where everything begins. And so all the decisions or things that you'll start to do with Purview, they really start with classification. And classification can mean a number of things. One of the core capabilities Microsoft has and has had in the platform from the early days is identifying and categorizing sensitive information. And you might have seen, if you've been in the Purview platform before, you might have seen sensitive information types under classifiers. And this is really pattern-based detection. So it's helping us find sensitive information by looking for patterns in your data, things like credit card numbers, SIN numbers. It could be employee IDs. You can add your own sensitive information types if you have certain patterns that your organization used. Sometimes, banks and lenders will have customer numbers or loan application numbers, things like that. And it can also be based on keywords as well. You can have sort of sensitive list of keywords. And then I'm not going to get into this in too much detail, but there's some other features, more AI, machine learning based features. Trainable classifiers let you identify information that might be a little bit more fuzzy or a little bit broader, things like contracts or other legal documents, or maybe even IP or patent applications, things like that. You could, if they follow a relatively consistent format, you can train the AI to recognize and find those things. It does take a bit of time to do that, so I'm not going to talk about it. If you are interested, let me know. I'm happy to chat about it after this as well. But really, the classification part of this, why it's so fundamental, is it drives other parts of Purview, or it can drive other parts of Purview. Things like sensitivity labels, records management, and data loss prevention. I'll touch on those too. But I always sort of want to start here because it is foundational. It kind of has its tentacles in other parts of Purview. And so what this can look like, if you're wondering, do we use sensitive information types? What are maybe the SITs that are in our organization or in our data? You can go into information protection and go into the reports area. And this area is changing. So you may or may not see this depending on what toggle you have enabled. But if you can toggle it sort of on or off until you get to the sort of classification view. And then you'll see some of the sensitive information types that the Purview platform finds in your content that's in Microsoft 365 already. So within the common workloads, SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, Teams, etc. And this can be a starting point, right? This can give you some insight into maybe some places you want to focus some attention. And even just validate, is it finding correct sensitive information types? Because one of the common complaints, and I see this actually in my own, this is my little dev environment here, it's giving me, I can go into more detail in the Data Explorer, is telling me all the types of information that might be present. And I know some of these are and some of these aren't. But this is, again, a starting point, gives me insight into places where maybe I want to put in some extra focus. Maybe I need to focus on financial sensitive information first and then worry about the rest later. And don't worry if it's not accurate. Nothing is happening in terms of things being labeled or retained with this unless you actively do it. This is really just to give you, again, information and insight. And I want to just quickly put this in. I added this in just before this session webinar started. So if you look at the Microsoft roadmap, there's things Microsoft's always adding, right? And this Purview platform is changing very, very quickly. But one of the areas that they are going to be investing more is to try to make this sensitive information types give more accuracy and have fewer false positives. And so this is really promising, I think. I think this will help sort of improve the usefulness of sensitive information types. And so if you are in that sort of bucket where you've checked it out before, didn't seem that accurate, this is maybe a space to watch for the future, as I do expect you'll have more accuracy and more control over what is being classified. So something to watch out for. But again, a place to start, a foundational element is understanding the sensitive information and to build that classification. Another place in Purview that helps with classification, and I'll often look into, especially if an organization has rolled out some AI tools or Copilot, is to look at the data security posture management. And this is another place that can help you identify sensitive and overexposed data, especially in how AI it might be using that sense of information. And then it does try to give you sort of suggestions for where to go next, what to do, and help you focus your effort, what kind of policies you might want to create in the future. And so this is what it looks like, just a quick view. If you are in the Purview platform and you have access to lots of different areas, you'll see DSPM show up, and there might even be two. There might be a classic and then this newer one. I recommend looking at this newer one. And then one of the areas to start off with is looking at posture, basically some of the basic metrics or reports. And it will tell you, again, giving you insight into if you are using labels already, it'll tell you what's been classified or labeled in the past 30 days and how it's changed. As well, it'll give you, if you're using data loss prevention, it'll tell you some other things. So depending what you're using the platform, it'll give you different metrics. And then it has a bunch of objectives that it will suggest based on your use, especially your use of Copilot. And so if you're in there, this is just like an example again. It will suggest here that I might want to think about data exposure in M365 Copilot and some of the interactions. And then I will identify anything that it's found that's using sensitive data in the past 30 days. And so again, giving you some information, maybe think about how you might want to classify or label the information next. And then this is just another detail view. It'll tell you what sort of policies it recommends and then sort of direct you to create the policy in the right place. And so this is something as well that can help you think about your classification, where to prioritize. I sort of always sometimes say, like, start with the crown jewels, start with the areas that are going to be the most sensitive, and then work out from there. Okay, and my last point about classification is this is our most recommended way to classify or organize content is by paying attention to the information architecture, structuring it really well in SharePoint, giving people, places and sites where they should be saving information in the right way, right place for project information, the right place for contracts, things like that. And then once you have that information architecture in place, then other parts of Purview like sensitivity labels and records management will be much easier to roll out because it is based on this usable structure that works. And we have many sessions about this. A lot of our sort of webinars, blog posts, things like that have talked about how to structure information really well for people. And Michael, who's our CEO, is kind of, I would say, a YouTube celebrity for this space. And this is a very highly viewed and highly recommended video if you want to learn more about classifying information on the SharePoint side. Again, I'm not going to get into that as much into this webinar. I want to talk about Purview, but this is probably our #1 recommendation under classification. So go check that out afterwards if you want to learn more. Okay, so that was my overview of classification, right? We talked about sensitive information types, we talked about the data security posture management, and then we talked about information architecture in SharePoint. And all of those things will help you understand what is this data. So then we can do more things in Purview with your information and protect your information. And so this next section is going to be about understanding who can do what with information, and then putting in some of those protection layers and control layers. And so the first area, and this is often, sensitivity labels are often one of the first things that organizations will roll out for their content across files or emails, their SharePoint sites and Teams as well. And so what this is, it's more than just sort of a stamp or a sticker. What this is, these are labels that will travel around with your files, and it will sort of allow certain actions based on what you've configured. So allow people to share either externally, maybe be able to summarize that content, be able to use it in Copilot. That's what export sometimes means. And so these actions are defined when you're setting up a sensitivity label. And then they can change as well, right? So you can have different labels that do different things. And one of the powerful areas for sensitivity labels, especially if you're rolling out Copilot, is that Copilot will respect sensitivity labels. So if something is labeled, say, restricted or highly confidential, you can configure it so Copilot does not use that in its responses, right? So that's something can help you protect, again, going back to this idea of your crown jewels, it can help you protect that by using sensitivity labels. People can still access that highly restricted or confidential content, but you can block AI tools from using it. Okay, and this is just a quick overview of just a quick structure of a simplified sensitivity label sort of setup here. I do recommend starting small with sensitivity labels, maybe have 3 or 4 labels that are different, are clear, and that people can understand. You don't want to sort of come out the gate with too many right away. And most of the time, these are going to be auto-applied to content. So you come up with rules, again, based on how your information is structured. So it could be the sites, the type of sites or teams as well. It could also get more nuanced than that. And you can use the sensitive information types I talked about earlier to drive what is labeled. So there's different ways of doing it, lots of sort of controls and levers in the platform. But I do recommend starting maybe with 3 or 4. And so there, in this example here, you see public, general, or I like the term internal a bit better. General tends to be a bit vague, but public, internal, or general, confidential, which could encrypt content or maybe doesn't. Sort of depends on how far you want to go with encrypted files. And then you could have one as well for restricted, and that could be very, very highly confidential. Maybe it's like, the if it ever leaked, this would be very highly detrimental to your organization, for example. And then after that, you could go more specific. Maybe you have labels for certain highly confidential projects or other places, or labels deployed just to certain types of users or groups. Maybe legal or finance has a label that's just special for them. And so you can do that stuff later after rolling out sort of the basic design. And on the user side, so I did say you publish them to users or groups. If they are set automatically on documents, users never really then have to worry about it. They don't have to change it. Of course, when you're in an application like Word or some other apps, you can change the sensitivity label that is there. So this is just an example of what that looks like in the user interface. And we did write a blog post, a couple of blog posts actually in the past year on sensitivity labels. And one of them talked about how to deploy sensitivity labels. And so we still recommend sort of this crawl, walk, run model, where you start with a simple design, 3 or 4 labels. It could be focused on manual labeling if that's something you want to use as a way to educate users, have them sort of manually label content initially, or maybe start with a pilot group where they are using manual application. It does help, again, with sort of the training and the awareness of this. You could also just sort of jump into some automatic labeling. So maybe you start with the internal or general label, and that becomes the default for new documents going forward or new files. And that people start to get then some awareness of, okay, this is something new. They're showing it, they're seeing it in sites and teams, and they start to get some awareness that way as well. And then go into the next stage, which is more comprehensive, focus on maybe encryption or some of the sharing controls, other things, and rolling out sort of a more fulsome suite of sensitivity labels. And so there's a link here. You'll get the slides, as Noel mentioned, and you can go check that out on our blog. So we sort of talk about this phased approach to rolling out sensitivity labels. And the last bit I want to mention, so if you have dipped your toe into this already, you're already using sensitivity labels, this might be something, if you haven't seen this recently, something to check out. Under reports, information protection reports, Microsoft is rolling out posture reports. And so you just toggle that on and it gives you some more detailed reports on how labels are being used and adopted in your organization. You can kind of drill down into more details, and then it can guide you into some more detailed reporting that was a little bit harder to do before. So this has been a welcome change, and from my perspective as well. Still only goes back 30 days, but it's baby steps. We're improving over time. There's also a preview feature. You may or may not see it depending on if you have the previews enabled, but you can create custom reports too. And so that means you can add in metrics and charts and create reports. I find this is useful for any kind of executive reporting, maybe, or if you want to report on certain departments, how legal is maybe using sensitivity labels, that kind of thing. That can be a useful area to explore as well, as the feature goes into sort of its general availability. I just want to call that out. So maybe I will pause again. We'll do another fun poll. This is just more to reflect on how you might be using sensitive labeling today. And so, yeah, how are you using it? Are you not using it? Is it something that you have set up and it's manual today? You haven't automated them? Do you have some auto labeling policies in place, or are you using a third-party classification? Maybe not even using Purview for this. So I see some of the responses coming in. Seems about 3/4 of us were not using it. It's mostly manual. Okay, that's okay. We have a place to start from, and sort of split between some people have used them, but they haven't automated them, and we have auto labeling policies. So a number of you already have those auto labeling policies in place. So maybe you can check out the reports and some of those elements just to see how it's growing over time, right? Are more files being labeled sort of month to month. Great. Okay. So I'm going to, in our whirlwind tour here, go to the next area. Next big section I find in Purview that organizations look to roll out is the data loss prevention, or DLP. And this is really helping if you want to think about stopping sort of data exfiltration, data leaks. This is an area that can help with that. And so they also, I should mention, DLP complements sensitivity labels. It may seem like they're kind of the same, kind of similar, because there is some sharing controls and sensitivity labels, but DLP goes sort of a level deeper. It does intercept the use of data. So as people are doing things, whether it's in Copilot or other places, it will show actions, things like block, audit, or alert, depending on what you've configured in your DLP policy. So a common scenario for this is, organizations are rightly worried about this, is users using or pasting sensitive information into Copilot or an AI agent. Data loss prevention is definitely part of the toolkit to help get a handle on that. And so how they work is, the reason why I started with sensitive information types and sensitivity labels, this is all related. DLP looks at sensitive data that you classify, you've told Purview this is sensitive, and it looks across emails, files, and cloud storage. And then it will track how people are using that sensitive data. So you select policies, and then it'll apply actions to that. So it'll, if you want to block people from doing something and then just give people a message or a tip, you could do that. If you want to audit it, if you don't want any users to know about what's happening, you could just do that as well. And so there's different actions that you can choose. And there is kind of similar to when you're thinking about sensitivity labels, a design process for DLP, but I find for DLP, it'll be ongoing, right? So you'll start with, you start with your core stakeholder groups. You will start with probably 1 or 2 sensitive data categories that you really care about. Maybe it's financial, maybe it's personal information. And from there, you'll start to define, okay, what do we want people to be able to do or not do with that sensitive data, and choose those locations as well. And so, I like to sort of write down some of these things, make sure sure we have sort of a design document we're going with. And then the other key thing, once you start implementing DLP, is to use the simulation feature. I find it's really helpful to understand what is going to be the impact of enabling this policy. So before it gets enabled, you can test it out and get some insight. And this is just a quick preview of this, is get some insight into the volume of content that this will impact and how many matches there are. So definitely recommend trying that out first. And I just wanted to give a suggestion. I really like this suggestion of how to name DLP policies. So unlike sensitivity labels, you will probably end up with a lot of these. Over time, you could really scale this depending on how you're scoping your sensitive data, how specific you are in choosing what you want to have policies for. And so one way to think about naming these is thinking of them, coming up with a consistent structure that you like. You don't have to follow this one, but be consistent in how you name them so then it's easy to go back. But one option is to start with the action. So what are you trying to do with this policy? Are you trying to block things from leaving your organization, or do you just want to send alerts, or do you just want to audit, right? So pick your sort of action. And so you can have that sort of as your first word as one suggestion, and then pick your condition. So in this case, maybe you're just focused on having sensitive content, sensitive financial content. Maybe that's your condition. And you don't want to share it to Copilot. So Copilot will be your location. And so coming up with a simple sort of framework like this can help you then scale these DLP policies over time and help you find them as well. So just one little tip on sort of that, because I've seen how these grow quite quickly over time. And then on the user side of things, so sometimes you can make DLP policies that just block things from happening, and all they're doing is alerting people behind the scenes. But you can also have tips show up, or telling users in the moment when they're doing something that this particular action has been flagged or it's been blocked. And so this is just an example. I have a file here with a bunch of credit card information. You can see this little red icon there in the middle of the screen. And then if people dig into it, they can get this policy tip. And so they would see this in the document as well, sort of the policy tip showing up there too, and they see it in the library. And they could also get an email as well. So when alerts are triggered, of course, DLP can send emails. So there's different options, different things you can sort of combine to let people know, especially as you start rolling this out and start communicating about the policies, what they'll start to see. I do find the alerts are more useful for administrators. You can see it's kind of technical here, but this is something that, especially on if you have service accounts or other administrator accounts, it can be useful to have those triggers sent there. And of course, you can go into Purview and Defender and see those alerts too. So just multiple places to get into that. One thing I do hear is sort of feedback about DLP, and so this is something to pay attention as you roll this out over time, is are people getting sort of alert fatigue or getting too many alerts? And there are options within setting up a DLP policy to configure alerts so that they aggregate. So they're only triggered when a threshold is met. And so I do recommend looking into that if this is something you're already experiencing with the DLP policies. And so you can turn off those emails completely or aggregate them as well. Okay, so and I probably could talk about DLP and designing DLP policies in more depth. So if there's any interest in having just a focus session on that, we could do that another time. I know I did go through that relatively quick, but hopefully you get a sense of sort of what this feature is for and how it can help sort of protect sensitive information from either being used in AI tools or being shared externally. Maybe you don't want certain information to be ever sent to external emails, that kind of thing. Okay, this is another part of Purview, insider risk management, and really this is sort of about identifying risk patterns. So whether those are, and it doesn't have to be sort of malicious risk patterns, it doesn't have to be things that are, people are doing bad on purpose, but it could also be accidental. And as more AI tools are being used, Copilot, the more accidental kind of leaking of information it could happen, right? Because AI, again, is just sucking in, it's like a vortex, it's sucking in so much stuff. And so this is especially important. I think it's going to become more relevant as more AI agents are being developed, maybe in your organization or being used. This is an area that can help keep a handle on sensitive information being used in those places. So one of the classic examples that this feature kind of helps with as well is, if employees are leaving an organization and maybe they're downloading things to their Dropbox or sending it to their personal emails, you can connect insider risk to other systems like HR, if that's where you're tracking HR information systems, that's where you're tracking people departing the organization, and using those signals, then it can sort of drive how insider risk management does its calculations. And so that's kind of an advanced operation, but I just wanted to mention it in case you're wondering about that, how this could connect to other systems in your organization. Insider risk does have that sort of capability as well. And it is based on some policies. Just there's some quick policies that you can create, sort of basically templated ones that Microsoft gives you, and or you can create custom policies. These are just some of the quick ones that are there. So it can help detect any potential data leaks as well, which is probably the most common insider risk management policy that is created. It can also do things like help you protect some of your critical assets, as well as detect if users are emailing sensitive assets outside your organization, say, again, personal email addresses and things like that. And so you can come in here, you can create those policies. And one thing, maybe it's a little hard to see here, but it used to be very centered on user policies, and now as well, there's agent policies. So as more agents are maybe being created or used in your organization, you can use insider risk to help track if there's any kind of sensitive information being used in those agents. So another area that is growing and changing based on some of the AI tools. I just want to show this user's dashboard here because it tends to be sort of, if you're using this feature at all or your security teams are, it can be a sort of the control center for investigating any kind of incidents. And this is a place as well where you can create cases that you can track and collaborate on things with other people in the security team if that needs to happen. And this can also be anonymized too. So it doesn't need to have people's names or things like that. It can be anonymized. And that way just to sort of eliminate any bias and that kind of thing. So I just wanted to call that out. The user dashboard is something that tends to, if you're using this, will be a place that you spend some time in. And it will summarize alerts and also any cases as well per user. And then related to this is adaptive protection. I think this is kind of cool because it will, drive some things that people can do or can't do based on their risk profile. And so adaptive protection will kind of change people's risk profile based on some of their activities. So if people, let's say, are downloading a whole bunch of things, they've done, a whole bunch of things from OneDrive or SharePoint, that could presumably elevate their risk level. And so Microsoft Purview provides some default ones: elevated risk level, moderate risk level, and minor risk level. You can change those as well. And then just how that's used is if you do define these inside this insider risk profile, then it can change what people can do with data loss prevention. For example, if someone is elevated risk, or they're marked as that within insider risk, then it can provide a block action. Or maybe if they're just moderate risk, they are blocked, but they can override it. So you can use that as sort of a more advanced thing, again, more nuanced, but you can use how you define that risk to drive what people can then do with DLP, as well, with other places like data lifecycle management, which is about retention, which is about, preserving data. If someone is marked as elevated risk, maybe their data is preserved, right? Maybe there's a reason you want to do that. So just wanted to mention that it is can sometimes be confusing to understand how all of these things fit together, but this is an area I'm seeing more and more organizations use as well to provide some of that nuance and dynamic capability. I wanted to call that out. So that was my quick tour of protection and control capabilities in Purview. And hopefully there are some places in there, ideas that you saw that maybe you can try or explore in the future as well. And the last section of this, I want to talk about auditing, e-discovery, and compliance. And I bundled this under this question of, can we prove we did the right thing? But it is just about getting evidence and understanding how data is handled, right? So that's how I think about this set of capabilities. So I'll start with audit and e-discovery, and I put these together because they're different but similar. So auditing tends to be an area that especially administrators of your Microsoft platform will want to know and get familiar with, because they can review things, any user admin actions, downloads, what people are doing in Copilot, what files they're accessing, those kinds of things. If they ever need to get into a deeper investigation, or they just need to get some maybe they just need to get some insight so they can share with management on how people might be using certain features or capabilities. And so the audit section of Purview is pretty powerful. You can do some searches and understand activities and sort of who did what and when. E-discovery is similar in that you can look up the history of what has happened within your Microsoft 365 system. You can locate messages, documents, and chats. But there is a bit more of an element of making cases, being able to collect and gather together a certain set of content that you might want to use in, say, maybe there's a legal situation, you want to use that to pass on to lawyers, or you want to use it as maybe a freedom of information kind of package. So you can sort of package that content together and create it and use it in sort of your next step of your process. Where auditing is just more about the activities and the actions. So they're different but similar, I will say. And depending on what you need to do next is, it'll base your decision on what feature or capability that you use. And so this is just a example of what the search looks like when you go into the audit section. And so you can see you have a number of different ways you can drill into the history of your Microsoft suite. You can, one area I, definitely recommend you explore is the activities section. There's different ways of searching activities. If you know the detailed operation, you can use that more advanced query, or you can search. So say you're looking for something related to SharePoint, SharePoint sites created, that sort of thing. You can look for that in there, or Copilot, etc. You can also narrow it down by users, by sites, by workload. So if you're just interested in SharePoint or OneDrive or Teams, you can narrow it down that way, because you do tend to get a lot of results with this. If you haven't exported already, sometimes it can take a little while, so you won't get results right away. You sort of set it up, and then you can go get your coffee, come back, and see those results. And they can be exported as well. There is an API if you want to build in some tooling that automatically regularly collects certain types of audit logs or history and does something with that information. You can do that through APIs. And I haven't really talked about licensing as much in this talk today. This is a whole sort of area we could talk at length about, but just be aware that depending on your license, you will have access to a different amount of history within the audit tool. So with E3, there's 180 days or 6 months, and then you get longer with E5, and you can even go up to 10 years with additional licenses. So just wanted to call that out. And then with e-discovery, so this is really helpful for investigations or legal cases, things like that, as I mentioned, or freedom of information or data subject rights, if people want to know how their information is being used in an organization. And so there is sort of a process when you start an e-discovery case. There's a process that you will follow here, and the first section or the first step will be to search your content. And so you'll choose your data sources, whether that's OneDrive, Exchange, SharePoint, all of the above, and then build your conditions. And so it's a little bit more, you have a little bit more options here compared to the audit feature. So you can add in different keywords and sort of build this sort of sequence as you need to. And I think I had an example here. Yes, I have an example for if you want to investigate, say, Copilot. What you would do, again, start an e-discovery case, and then search for Copilot activity using these options within the e-discovery tool. And so there's this item class option here, and then lets you select Copilot activity. And one thing I just want to mention is this is quite powerful. At first glance, it looks simple, but there's quite a lot of options that you can get into and nuance. And so Microsoft has some good documentation to explain sort of all of these things, all different options. So I recommend checking that out, especially if there's certain activities, like in this example, Copilot, you want to look for. There'll be some guidance to help you do that. And then once you have your search set up how you want, so again, Microsoft will execute this or Purview will execute this, go get your coffee, come back. And then you can start to you can go through the results, the content results. It's showing you, you can add it to what's called a review set, and then tag things if you need to sort of tag things for lawyers or other people, and then analyze whether you need to keep that content in this review set or not, right? So you can kind of create that for yourself or for your team. So I recommend checking this out if this is something that is useful to help streamline some of those investigations. Okay, so another area around audit and compliance that I put in here was communication compliance. And this comes up sometimes when organizations are asked or they want to moderate conversations. So let's say they want to moderate things in Teams or Viva Engage. If you haven't seen Viva Engage before, it's sort of the social platform of M365. You can create communities and have conversations, go back and forth. Often organizations use it for large communities, maybe even fun things like buy and sell, marketplace, stuff like that. And so the reason why I'm bringing up communication compliance is it can help you detect any kind of inappropriate or risky communications if people are doing things that might be sensitive in those social platforms. And why you might want to do that is if there's anything around reputation harm, internal issues that you want to protect from. And it is related to so within Viva Engage, so the screenshot is you can report conversations or report comments, and this is something you can enable. It's not enabled by default. You can enable this, and then in a simple model, you could have it, anything that's reported go to an email, an admin email, and they have to go follow up. But if you enable Purview communication compliance, then you can handle those reviews, what happens when people report comments within Purview itself. So it is a better way to just kind of streamline handling moderation than just using an email address for an admin. So I do recommend, if this is something that's a concern in your organization, to check out communication compliance and use that in conjunction with Viva Engage or Teams. And similar to some of those other areas I showed, you can create policies within communication compliance, and Microsoft gives you some starting points. So it gives you some starting points for inappropriate content or text images, as well as Copilot interactions in addition. So they've added this in the past couple of years to help you sort of monitor any inappropriate prompts or things that might be happening in Copilot. Okay, so the last section, our sort of favorite, under this compliance and audit section, I put in records management and data lifecycle and group them together. If you want to go deeper on records management, I should also mention we have a number of other webinars and blog posts and things on Purview records management. But overall, sort of at a high level, if you've never seen this before, the reason why you might want to use this is then it controls how long information or data is kept, when it is deleted, does it have reviews, and before it gets disposed, you can also enable that. And often organizations enable Purview because they want to meet some legal requirements, regulatory requirements, or even just business requirements as well. So it might be risky to keep information too long, and you want to make sure that gets disposed of correctly. And ideally, we always recommend that records management and these data lifecycle capabilities, they work automatically behind the scenes. Most users probably aren't even aware this is happening. And the reason why is that we know over sort of 20 years of knowledge management type projects, users are not going to go in and sort of set things for records management necessarily. It is an extra effort that they need to take in their day when they're just trying to get their work done. And so as much as possible, you want to create policies that are auto-applied, labels that are auto-applied, and so that users don't have to interact with it directly, and content after a certain amount of time will just get disposed of and deleted. And retention labels also don't work in a vacuum or work by themselves. They do work with some of those other features that I talked about as well. And so if you have a way of classifying sensitive data, whether that's with the sensitive information types I talked at the beginning, or you have grouped sensitive information, say project information in SharePoint sites, and you have that information architecture set up, then you can use records management relatively easier to protect that information. You may say keep project information for 7 years and then get rid of it. And so this, going back to how I started this classification, this will really drive what you choose here will drive how you use records management or data lifecycle later on. So important to think about that and to define that, and then decide, then implement your retention policies or records management policies or your file plan as needed. And one little nuance in here, Microsoft has two different ways kind of doing retention. So you'll see data lifecycle management in Purview, and you'll see records management. So there's two solution areas. And one will allow you to create retention labels, and data lifecycle management will allow you to start with retention policies. And I know they sound similar, but they do behave differently. Retention labels tend to be the area we focus on the most because they allow you to be more specific. They allow you to apply labels to individual files or items, say in a SharePoint site, apply labels to emails, that kind of thing. And these can be applied manually or automatically. And like I said previously, most of the time you're going to want to have these apply automatically. But they are powerful. There's a lot of actions. There's a few actions you can define when you're creating retention labels. You have more options of what to do after the time ends. And so you have these capabilities. You could have things delete automatically, or you could have a review cycle where it's sent to, say, a group of records managers, and then they review it before items are disposed. And retention labels also, as you create what's called your file plan in that area of Purview, you can create mark content as records too. So definitely more powerful. And I know I'm going into sort of a lot of detail here. And again, I'll mention that we do have some webinars and some demos that show you how to use some of these records management features in detail. However, if you are looking for a place to start, maybe you want to just get a handle on, say, a storage situation you have. Maybe you have OneDrives just are getting too big and you want to apply some broader retention policies and dispose of items, say, if they have been modified in the last 5 years. Retention policies might help you at sort of that bigger, larger scale. And so you pick a location when you're defining a retention policy. So you don't have as much detail or control as retention labels, but you can, say, apply a rule like delete content if it hasn't been modified in the past 5 years. You can apply it to all your OneDrives, for example, or maybe you want to start with a pilot group. And so this can be really useful in situations where you want to work on some bigger initiatives like reducing your storage, for example. And these tend to be faster and easier to implement, obviously, because there's not as many rules or settings you need to apply. And so this is helpful to use as well. And you can use these together, right? So you don't have to just pick one. You can have policies applied to, say, emails and OneDrive, and then use labeling for your SharePoint sites or for your really highly sensitive information. And my last little bit about, I have so much I wanted to cover with retention and records management. My last little reminder here is that retention is really great when you want to keep data or files for a certain amount of time. And it can even keep it, Microsoft can even keep it even if users delete it. It's not really deleted. It goes into a special location and it's kept there until the rule is met, until maybe the time has expired. And it helps you around legal regulatory requirements. It can automatically delete when it's no longer needed, especially retention policies. And it can be scoped really specifically if you want to specific users, sites, or even how we tend to work is with defining content types within SharePoint and then applying different retention rules based on those content types. And so it's a really powerful feature set in Purview. What it doesn't do is some of these things that some of these other features I talked about earlier do. So it doesn't block access to content. It doesn't encrypt or protect things as data is moving around. It doesn't monitor things or restrict sharing in real time. And so there's other capabilities that will help you with that within the Purview platform and within the Microsoft security umbrella in general. And it doesn't replace, so again, these things all sort of complement. It doesn't replace sort of DLP or sensitivity labels. There's different reasons why you would use those versus retention. So hopefully this helped you sort of think about, this is my whirlwind tour for Purview, help you think about how all of those things and how it relates. This is just a slide I put in of all the things that we did talk about. So we talked about these different streams today under data security and data compliance. There are more. There's even more. We had things. Data governance tends to apply if you have data that's outside of Microsoft 365 and you want a sort of more holistic view and some other tools. There's some more capabilities in Purview to explore around that. And then because it is a platform, it's a whole ecosystem, there are things that underpin all the different areas of Purview. And so I talked about classification, specifically sensitive information types today, but there are more things, especially around creating permissions, roles, and adaptive scopes, which can apply to various pieces. So there's more to explore. If I've just sort of piqued your interest, there's more you can get into. And again, these are the sections that I covered today. So I wanted to also just be really clear. There is more. If there's interest, I'm happy to do more sessions like this in the future, do a more deeper dive. And I did, just to wrap up here, talked about those top 3 questions. This is how I sort of think about the different areas of Purview and what are we trying to do. And so you're not going to roll everything out all at once. This is much more key message here. Typically, you're going to start with classification, right? Understanding the risks. What are the risks out there? Then you want to start putting in some controls, control that risky use. And you may flip these. Then maybe you want to do compliance first and then control risky use. But those are usually the phases, high-level phases, when we think about rolling this out. And when it's working, so why do we do all of this? Then we know that we can confidently and productively use AI and as AI agents grow in our organizations without introducing too much new risk. As security or compliance teams, you can respond faster, and we start to have more evidence, right? We start to have more proof of what is happening, across our data landscape, and we can use that in our conversations, and then to guide our future policies as well. So just to wrap up here in the last few minutes, we'll throw up our last poll. And just to get you thinking, we're not using this for anything, but maybe just for your own self, where would you go next in Purview? What would you want to tackle next? Is it understanding your estate more? So that's more of the classification side. Is it controlling risky data use? That's protection. Or is it proving compliance, getting more data and information? Or something else? If you want to use other, you can do that too. Just want to think about it. So it looks like compliance is of interest. Okay. And understanding your estate more. Yeah, that's great. Perfect. And so do we have any questions that we want to cover, Noelle? Anything else?
Yeah.
If you have any questions as well, you can always email me or email our contact at Gravity Union too.
Yes, Jazz, we do have one question. So on the slide before you went into the summary, I think it was slide 55 or 54, someone asked, does it allow or help you to manage a retention schedule?
Yes, so the file plan. Yeah, so it's called the file plan in Purview. And so you can go in there and basically put in your labels and then the rules, which would come from your retention schedule. Yeah.
Yeah. We have a few minutes more for more questions. If anyone has a question, please drop them in the chat.
And in the meantime, if you want to join in future events, we have a couple of events. Noelle, did you want to mention?
Yeah, we have exciting events coming up in June. First up, we will have a webinar with one of our partners. So more details to come, so stay tuned for that. And in late June, we will be at the ARMA California Summer Conference. We will be having a booth and a short speaking session. So exciting times ahead.
Nice. Summer in California. Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate everyone, being involved in this and taking interest in Purview. If you have any ideas for future sessions, I'm happy to take those as well.
Yes, Jazz. We have one question that came up last minute.
A late breaking one. Okay, great.
Yeah. Does it or something else help with managing representatives?
Something. Sorry, managing representatives. Not. I don't know if anybody can clarify. I'm not sure what that part. Is that referring to managing your security and compliance team who can access it? Oh, like representatives. Yes. So there are various ways you could manage your records management team in there. So one area sometimes that I see organizations wanting to do this is when you're getting to the review cycle. So say, content's getting to the end of its retention, you want to have reviewers for that content before it gets disposed. You can manage that using groups and then direct Purview to send that sort of disposition review to that group of users, and then they would go in and review it. So I don't know if that answers that question, but you can use groups. There's also roles and permissions. There's quite a few roles and permissions in Purview if you go into that section under permissions. And so you can give your records team access to the records management section of Purview, and maybe they don't have access to everything else, right? So they can only take action in the areas that you want them to. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Jazz. I hope everyone has a great day ahead.
Thanks all. Bye.